I think when President Obama spoke in Cairo to the Muslim world, I always thought there was one world, but he spoke to the Muslim world. When he said that the Muslim world, and he was speaking, I think, mostly to the Palestinian people, should lay down their weapons and have a social, democratic, nonviolent movement, I think it was 9 or 10 days later, millions of people were on the streets of Iran, not only protesting the treatment of their government, but I think facing Mr. Obama and the United States of America that has a tradition of countries turning to the United States of America for leadership on this issue. And what is happening? Why, I come from the Jewish community, why is the Jewish community silent on this issue? On not only what's happening in Iran, but even the threat that Iran has to Israel, people are quiet. Elie Wiesel was at Yale last year. And to me, Elie Wiesel has the humility, for me, has the humility and wisdom of the greatest rabbinical tradition. He has a humility and a dignity that I think is very, very powerful. He's become a symbol of the Holocaust, of witnessing the Holocaust. He fought against apartheid. He stood against the genocide in Cambodia, in Rwanda, in Darfur. He's been a man of human rights. And he said, he was speaking about Iran, and he was speaking about the possibility of another Holocaust, another genocide of 6 million Jews. This is a year ago. And for me to see Elie Wiesel, and I sort of grew up in Montreal seeing him, he had family in Montreal, and he used to come to our synagogue and speak once or twice a year. And to see Elie Wiesel in his lifetime, and Holocaust survivors in their lifetimes, having to think about the possibility of another genocide was one of the most pathetic things I've ever seen in my life. But then Elie Wiesel went on to say that the thing that really bothers him, as if that wasn't enough, the thing that really bothers him is the silence of the Jewish leadership, the silence of students, the silence of intellectuals, the silence of the human rights community, and the silence of leaders of the Western free world. That we can allow this to go on is beyond. And I'll say that I mentioned George Bush because people engaged in the study of or the combating of anti-Semitism are perceived by some as being right-wing, as being fascist, as being ultra-nationalist, of being reactionary, of being only concerned with narrow ideas and narrow groups of people. And we're often dismissed, which I think is a tragedy for the human rights community. And I was recently at a conference in the Tate Gallery in London. It was the New Statesman, which is the intellectual sort of Marxist, progressive journal out of London, and the Tate Gallery. And they had some of the leading Marxist philosophers at universities speaking about how to engage radical Islam. Sort of taking the mantra of Washington and taking it a step further. And people like Terry Eagleton were saying they're opposed to Western hegemony, they're opposed to American domination in the international community, they're in favor of the environment. There's things in common with radical Islam that they, as Marxists, also have. And they were speaking about ways to engage radical Islam, and of course they spoke a lot about the Zionists and the Jews and the Israelis. And there was a feminist there, a 60-odd-year-old woman, I won't mention her name, who's written 20 books, some of them very important books on issues of sort of Marxist philosophy and feminism. And my friend is the curator there, I was invited, and I went for dinner with this group afterwards, and I turned to this, I sat next to this woman, and her daughter had just come back from a jihad camp in southern Lebanon, and she was teaching English to a group of jihadists, and she was very happy to be back in London, and she enjoyed her experience very much. And I turned to the woman and I said, you know, if I was a 75-year-old Anglo-Saxon professor from Oxford, a man, and I turned to you, and I said, you know what, I think you should leave the gallery, the Tate Gallery, and the restaurant immediately because you're a woman, and women should be at home, and they shouldn't have a future careers, and they shouldn't be out at night by themselves, and you should go home immediately. What would you think? So she thought for about 30 seconds, because I think I was pointing to this glaring contradiction of a feminist trying to engage in one of the most reactionary social movements on the face of the earth. And she turned to me and she said, from your accent I can tell that you're an American and you must be a neoconservative Bush supporter. That was her answer. And I really, I'll stop soon. If I can say that one of the very important things I think we need to do is to learn the language of radical Islam, and to learn the ideology and the symbols, and what is the mission, and what are the fatwas. Have people read fatwas? Have people read the charters and the policies? Because they're very open and upfront. We have to learn the language of this and realize, in my opinion, that there is no appeasing these people. That this is an ideology that is clear, they're consistent, they're upfront, they're honest, they don't hide anything. It's we in the West, the intellectuals and the human rights activists, I think, are put our heads in the sand. And this is an issue that I think, if you're concerned about human rights, not just the fight against anti-Semitism, or not just homophobia, not just gender inequality, but basic principles, democracy, citizenship, that everybody, regardless of all our differences, are equal under one legal system, then this should be something that's very alarming to you. And this is a moment, I would say, of truth. I was recently at a conference put on by Pugwash. Pugwash is an anti-nuclear proliferation organization. It has a reputation of being a peace organization. They have good offices in Iran still, to some extent. And we had a small gathering in Israel not too long ago on a kibbutz, and there were Chinese, Russian, EU, Canadian, American, and Israeli scholars, people who do social theory, like me, security people, and physicists. And there is no, of all the countries that were there, everybody knows and everybody agrees that Iran is trying to build a nuclear bomb. The arguments and the discussion and the disagreements came with China on one hand saying that it will take about 8 to 10 years for Iran to get the bomb or to use the bomb. The Israelis were saying it would be a year to 18 months. And then the argument was, would Iran actually use the bomb? The Israelis were saying we can't take the chance, and the Chinese were saying once the Iranians have a bomb, they'll become good citizens of the international community and they'll behave like other countries will. And everybody was other countries were sort of in between. And I think that the notion of containment that was used in the Second World War, I would argue, from a social theory perspective, I'm not a security studies person, I'm not a physicist, and I am not an expert on Iran either, but from a social theory perspective, this will be the first time ever that a regime that also has one foot in the material world, they're very astute and they're politically grounded in the material, but they also have a foot in the metaphysical. And Ahmadinejad talks about how glorious a martyr is. And Elie Wiesel spoke about how the suicide bomber, the individual, was becoming the suicide bomber of a nation. And we don't know how this regime will act if it has a nuclear weapon. We don't know. If we believe this is a group of people that believe in martyrdom, and this is not the same as capitalists or socialists or communists who are materialists ultimately. They just disagree about how to create wealth and how to distribute it. So this is a very serious issue, and I would argue that history teaches us that anti-Semitism begins with the Jews, never ends with the Jews, and we also know that you cannot appease a totalitarian social